I am Ingrid Mattson. I am professor and chair of Islamic Studies at Huron University College at Western University in London, Canada. And my book is The Story of the Qur'an, Its History and Place in Muslim Life. And there is a second edition you should look at. I wrote this book primarily for my students. I was teaching a course on an introduction to the Qur'an in my position when I was at Hartford Seminary, graduate theological seminary. My students were both Muslim and also Christians who were studying for ministry. So when I wrote the book, I had many different readers in mind, primarily university students or graduate students, but not just Muslims. I also was hoping to provide enough context in the book so that any reader who was a, well-educated reader could follow along and benefit from the book. The book is called The Story of the Qur'an because the Qur'an as the living word of the living God is, as we know, both timeless in a way, but also has had this presence in history, in the history of the lives of Muslims and communities and beyond. So there are a lot of stories that we can tell about the Qur'an. And I would say that there's not a main argument, but there is a primary goal in trying to present at least some of the diverse ways that the Qur'an is experienced in the lives of Muslims and communities. So not just in terms of interpretation, but how the Qur'an provides a sense of meaning to people's lives, or even structures the culture in which they live. The story of the Qur'an has 5 chapters. We begin with an introduction to the context of the revelation. I think it's important that people understand what that context is politically and religiously. Often Muslims only think about, Jahili Arabia as the context for the revelation of the Qur'an, but obviously all around the Arabian Peninsula were great world empires, existing religious traditions and communities, and it's important to understand that they lay the foundation for the communities that will continue to receive the Qur'an. The second chapter, I look at and present the kind of flow of revelation over the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in a thematic way. So drawing some of the main themes, of course, that God is one, eschatology, but also the persecution of believers, building community. What are some of those themes? Obviously, very limited, but what I think are core themes. In chapter 3 is structured by means of the ijaza that was presented to a young Muslim woman living in Chicago. She was in fact a student in the Islamic day school that I taught at part-time when I was studying for my PhD in Chicago. But as she was studying in that school, she was also preparing for her certificate in Tajweed, Qur'an memorization. And so I present her, she very kindly shared with me the chain of transmitters that her ijaza is from. So going from her to her teacher, her teacher's teacher, all the way back to the Sahaba, and to the Prophet Muhammad, of course, then the angel Jibril, and all the way to the Lord. So through this ijaza, what I do is I looked up every single person who is mentioned there. I was able to research and find there wasn't one person who I couldn't find. They were all available in biographical dictionaries, other historical texts. And I just chose a few of them over the centuries to pull up a little bit about the story of their lives, to show how the Qur'an was transmitted over history through people, and the determination of so many people to continue teaching, continue transmitting despite, terrible circumstances. I mean, the Mongols come in, but you have people still teaching. Then in chapter 4, we look at how the Quran influences Muslim culture. And that's everything from art and architecture to modes of healing, life cycles, views about death, etc. And then in chapter 5, we review the different, some of the modes, the many different modes by which Muslims understand the Quran, interpret the Quran, different schools of thought, why there are different schools of thought, and try to have a fair presentation of reasons why some may accept or reject certain forms of interpretation. I guess I said 5, but there is a 6th concluding chapter, really just wrapping up to simply explain, and I think this is maybe the argument of the book, is that interpretation is challenging because we always bring ourselves there. And the Quran is always, when we approach the Quran, we're always bringing ourselves, we're always bringing our communities. There's so much richness in that. There also can be conflict and tension. But in the end, isn't that the purpose of our life? And after all, it is God who created us and gave us these words in the way they are, knowing very well that we would have different points of view or different ways of understanding, or also new opportunities as humanity, as we encounter brand new situations, to look again at the Quran and see how can it give us a sense of meaning, purpose, direction, and something that provides us tools and a framework for discussion and community growth as well. Of course, every reader will take away from it what they will. Once a book is in the reader's hands, it's up to them to engage with it. I do hope that people do their best to be open to just listening to maybe new information or other points of view they haven't heard before. Doesn't mean you have to accept it, but at least to add to one's knowledge base. But also to understand that there may be a lot of information there that is more than you can manage at one time. You don't have to understand every bit of it. Read what's of interest. You can skip over passages that might be a little bit too technical. But in the end, at least, no matter who you are, whether you're even a religious person or not, to understand that this Quran, this holy book, has shaped the lives of so many people in so many different ways, and is certainly not something that can be reduced to a very simplistic one theme, one message, or that can be approached in a very decontextualized and literal way without doing it violence. I have been working for the past few years along with some partners on a major research project called the Hurma Project. Hurma is the word that means the sacred inviolability of the human being. And in this project, we're looking at how to prevent and respond to violations of trust in Muslim spaces. And what that means is we have these as a practicing Muslim myself, this is a faith that I hold very dear. The sayings and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad I hold very dear. The Quran, our sacred spaces, our communal religious spaces. It is very painful when we hear about any of that being misused, used in a way to hurt other people, to abuse people, or to um, you know, somehow take advantage of people's vulnerability for self-enrichment. And it's not that it's happening all the time, but when it happens, the consequences are great. You know, the impact of what some people would call spiritual abuse or spiritual harm is so profound that it's really important we pay attention to preventing that kind of misuse, so that we can have our spaces, to the extent that we're able, to have them be places where everyone can come and engage with others, shed their loneliness, have some time to turn to God in their prayers, and feel that they're able to grow and learn and develop, and that they're not driven away by bad experiences.